I don't remember the moment the forest stopped feeling like home, but I remember the first time it looked back at me. My name doesn't matter, not in the places where people whisper instead of speak. I'm a forest ranger in the Northern Pines, the kind of place where the trees crowd in so tightly that daylight feels rationed, and the locals still leave offerings on stumps like their grandparents did. I'm 35, and I've spent almost half my life patrolling these woods, thinking I understood them, thinking rules and reason were enough. I was wrong. Up here, the mountains breathe in a way that feels conscious. The pines creak like old bones. Tracks appear where no animal should walk. And every so often, you hear a story from someone who shouldn't be alive to tell it. What follows, these aren't just incidents or calls I responded to. These are the moments the forest peeled back what I thought I knew and showed me something ancient, hiding behind the bark and the wind. People call them spirits, shadows, guardians, monsters. I don't know the right word. All I know is that every ranger who lasts long enough out here carries their own scars, their own memories they pray never come back. And I carry mine. My introduction to the strangeness didn't start with screams or footprints or some dramatic rescue. It started quietly, like the forest was testing me. I'd been transferred to Pine Hollow Station 6 months earlier, a place even other rangers called unlucky. High disappearance rates, weird radio interference, and a long list of stories locals swore were true. The older rangers joked that Pine Hollow wasn't haunted. It was inhabited in a different sense. They always said it with a look, not a laugh. My first assignment was routine. Check trail markers along Ridgewater Loop, a 5-mile circuit thick with lodgepole pines, all packed together like a cathedral of wood. The air always smelled like sap and cold stone. I'd walked that loop a dozen times already, but the morning this story begins, the forest felt off. Not wrong, just attentive, like stepping inside a room where someone had been talking about you. At first, I tried brushing it off. I tend to overthink things, old habit born from trying to stay alive out here. But by mile 2, I noticed something different. The silence wasn't the peaceful kind. It was heavy, forced. You learn the difference quickly in the woods. When animals go quiet naturally, it feels like a blanket settling. But this felt like the moment right after a glass shatters in a quiet room. A tension, a waiting. I slowed down and turned off my radio. The static had been humming loud enough to irritate me anyway. I listened. Nothing. No wind brushing needles, no birds hopping on branches, not even distant water. Just an airless kind of quiet that pressed in around me. That's when I heard the knock. A single rap. Solid. Wooden. I froze. At first I thought someone was on the trail behind me. But the knock didn't echo like something above ground. Instead, it carried through the earth, like it came from the roots. A deep, hollow tap beneath my boots. I waited. Another knock. This time weaker, but unmistakable. Knock. Then silence again. I crouched and pressed my hand to the forest floor. My palm tingled like faint vibration had just faded. Rationally, I told myself it was some kind of natural shift, roots adjusting, a fallen log settling. The human mind hates gaps, so we fill them with logic, even when the logic is paper thin. I should have turned back right then. Any experienced ranger would have. But I was new, eager to prove myself, and stubborn enough to believe the forest just playing tricks on my senses. I kept walking. As I got deeper into the loop, I passed one of the older trail marker posts. It wasn't unusual. It stood like a weathered totem, carved with the trail number and a faded arrow. What was unusual was the message carved beneath it. Someone had taken a knife and scraped uneven words into the wood. Don't answer them. Them. I stared at the carving, tracing the letters with my glove. It looked fresh, not days-old fresh, but hours old. Whoever carved it either didn't want to be found or didn't survive long enough to worry about it. I radioed dispatch, but all I got was static thick enough to feel like gravel in my ear. Pine Hollow had blind spots, sure, but I'd never lost full signal here before. I checked the batteries. Fine. Checked my backup. Dead. When I switched to emergency frequency, the static changed pitch like it was responding. I shut it off. A cold breeze cut through the trees. Finally a sound, but it wasn't a breeze. The pines all around me trembled in a slow ripple like something massive had brushed against them. I lifted my flashlight and scanned the understory. That's when I saw the tracks. Massive. Humanoid. But too long, too narrow, like the footprint of something that walked on elongated arches. They were pressed deep into the soil, leading off the trail and into a dense patch of pines where the shadows gathered thick as tar. I took 3 steps backward without even realizing I'd moved. I'd heard stories from locals about something tall moving between the trees on foggy nights. They didn't say the word Yeti. They said Old Walker or the tall one under the ridge, creatures tied to mountain myths, not modern campfire tales. I always assumed those stories were metaphors, ways to keep kids away from the cliffs or the deeper ravines. But the prints were real. Too real. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the tree line. The woods seemed to breathe again. Not restful, uneven like something large was inhaling nearby. A dry, draughty intake of air that didn't match the rhythm of wind. The knocking returned. This time from the trees themselves, several soft, deliberate taps coming from different directions, like a coded signal, a warning, or a lure. My instincts screamed at me to leave. I turned around to follow the trail back out and froze. Another set of footprints had appeared behind me. Not mine, fresh, deep, and as unmistakable as the others. They were facing me. Something had walked up silently behind me, close enough I should have felt breath on my neck. Close enough I should have heard something. But the forest had stayed perfectly still. Fear climbed into my throat with a slow, icy crawl. I felt watched, studied, not by an animal. Animals don't hide their presence like that. This was something else, something that understood silence better than I ever could. I forced myself to breathe quietly and took one cautious step backward, then another until my boots aligned with my own earlier tracks. My pulse hammered so loudly it felt like another presence in the woods. The knocking came once more, closer, faster. Knock, knock, knock. Then the final one sounded so close that I flinched. Knock right behind me. I spun around, flashlight raised. Nothing, just trees. Endless, motionless pines. Nothing should move that quietly. Nothing that big should vanish without a sound. My mouth was dry as dust when I whispered to myself, stop, think, don't run. But every instinct I had said run. The forest listened. The forest waited. And in that thick, breathless silence, it felt like the pines were leaning closer. The pines didn't move, but the feeling did. An undeniable shift in the air, as if something massive had stepped closer without disturbing a single needle. For a moment, I couldn't trust my breath, or the ground beneath me, or even my own hearing. The silence had weight now. A presence. Like a hand pressing lightly against the back of my skull, encouraging me to turn, to look deeper into the shadows between the trees. I forced myself to focus on the trail ahead. It curved gently through the forest, the dirt packed firm by decades of hikers and rangers and search parties, a familiar path, a safe one, or so I needed to believe. Step by step, I started moving again, keeping my pace slow enough not to trigger whatever instinct kept whispering that sudden movements could be a mistake. The forest had its own rules, ones you only learned after breaking them. And I hadn't yet figured out which rule I'd already stepped over. The trail narrowed as I walked, or maybe it just felt that way. The trees leaned inward, their trunks stretching tall and thin like pillars in an ancient hall, their tops swaying with a rhythm I couldn't feel on my skin. My flashlight beam caught flecks of pollen drifting in the air, glowing golden like dust from a forgotten room. For a moment, it was almost beautiful. Then another footprint appeared ahead of me. Not beside my trail, not off in the brush, directly in the center of the path. Deep, precise, fresh. I felt my heartbeat lurch. The print hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. I would have seen it. It was impossible to miss. 8 inches longer than any human foot could be, toes splayed like the grip of a climbing creature. And the ground wasn't disturbed around it. No trail in, no trail out, just a single perfect footprint waiting for me. I stopped breathing. I didn't mean to. My lungs simply refused to draw air. A cold numbness crawled across my shoulders, spreading down my arms as if the forest had dipped me into an icy current. Behind me, branches flexed. I turned so slowly it felt like my spine was made of rusted metal. The trees stood still again, their silhouettes unchanging, their shadows deep enough to swallow whole shapes. But something had shifted among them, subtle, like a curtain just settling after someone brushed past it. I whispered into the emptiness just to hear a human voice again. "Who's there?" The forest gave nothing back, not even an echo. I could have walked backward, could have kept my eyes on the trees while tracing my steps out. But something inside me, the rational part still trying to negotiate with the impossible, told me that turning back didn't guarantee safety. Whatever was here wasn't following me in a straight line. It was appearing where it wanted, standing where it pleased, watching on its terms, not mine. So I did the only thing I could think of, the only thing that didn't feel like surrender. I moved forward. Each step was deliberate, as if any noise I made might break some unspoken truce. The footprint in front of me remained perfectly still, impossible and mocking. When I reached it, I knelt down and ran my gloved fingertips along the edge of the indentation. No warmth, no moisture, no scent, nothing to suggest an animal or a human, only the shape, the weight. The fact that something had stepped with absolute confidence in its existence. I stood again, and as I rose, I heard it, breathing, not human breathing, not the panting of a predator. This was deeper, hollow, like wind pushing through a cavern. A slow inhale, then a longer exhale that made the needles tremble on the branches above me. And it wasn't coming from any single direction. It was all around me. My chest squeezed tight as I tried to pinpoint the source. The sound wasn't closer or farther. It was within the forest itself, like the trees were acting as lungs for something massive hidden underground. I backed up, my heel almost slipping into the enormous footprint. The breathing stopped. Then something moved between the pines, fast enough to blur, tall enough to eclipse the moonlight. A towering silhouette, too slender to be a bear, too upright to be any animal that belonged here. My light caught only the faintest reflection, something pale near where a face should be. Not eyes, not a mouth. Just pale, shifting motion like skin stretched over bone. And then it was gone again. I spun in a full circle, scanning every gap between the trunks, but the shape had vanished as seamlessly as it had appeared. No footsteps, no snapping twigs, nothing but the faint tremor of branches swaying from its passage. My pulse hammered against my ribs so hard I thought my sternum might crack. I wanted to call for backup. I wanted to hear a human voice. But my radio sat cold and silent in my pocket, and I knew instinctively that whatever was out here wouldn't allow it to work. Not yet. The locals had always said these woods were listening. I used to think they meant the animals, the wind, the natural world paying quiet attention. But now I understood they meant something older, something that didn't want metal voices cutting through its home. A distant sound reached me then, metal clanging lightly, tapping rhythmically as if swinging on a chain. I knew that sound. A bear bell. But it wasn't attached to a bear. It was attached to a person. A hiker. My stomach dropped. Ridgewater Loop didn't attract many visitors this early in the season, but a few adventurous campers still wandered in, especially ones who didn't realize how unpredictable the weather turned after dark. I followed the sound, moving fast now, my fear cutting cleanly into purpose. The bell rang again, softer, farther away. I quickened my pace, weaving through the trees, stepping over roots slick with moss. The bell chimed once more, then cut off sharply, like someone had grabbed it. My blood turned cold. I reached a small clearing marked by a fallen cedar, its trunk wide enough to sit a family on. The moonlight struggled to reach the forest floor here, and the shadows pooled thick like ink. But I could still see the edge of a hiking pack sitting near the log. The straps were intact. The top flap buckled, no sign of damage, but the ground beside it was disturbed. Deep drag marks, soil scooped aside in a long sweeping trail leading toward the darkest part of the clearing. I drew my flashlight and followed the drag marks with the beam. They moved several feet, then abruptly stopped. No footprints, no boot impressions, just a final patch of flattened pine needles as if someone had been pulled upward, not outward. Above me, branches shook lightly. I lifted the flashlight. A single piece of gear dangled from the branch, a silver bell tied to a frayed scrap of fabric. The rest of the bell string had been torn away. The metal was still swinging. Someone had hung it there only seconds before. My throat tightened as I realized it wasn't swaying with the breeze. It was swaying like something had stepped off the branch, a downward motion, a weight removed. I backed away slowly from the tree. That's when the whisper reached me, right beside my ear. He shouldn't have followed the knocking. I reeled backward, nearly tripping on the cedar trunk, my flashlight jerking wildly across the clearing. The voice was low, rough, like someone whose vocal cords had been scraped raw from cold air. It didn't sound like a hiker. It didn't sound like a person at all. It sounded old and hungry. I forced my trembling legs to move. I didn't run, not yet, but every instinct in my body told me I was seconds from seeing something I wasn't meant to. The forest pressed closer. The breathing returned. And somewhere among the towering pines, the bell chimed again, this time without any wind at all. The bell's soft chime cut through the clearing like a thread pulled taut. Not loud, not frantic. Just a single deliberate note that trembled in the air longer than metal should. I felt it more than heard it, like a vibration passing through bone. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. The bell was still hanging where I'd seen it, but it wasn't moving now. The motion had stopped before I even finished turning. Yet I had heard that sound fresh and clear from somewhere deeper in the pines. Another bell chimed farther away. Then another. Not chaotic, not random. A pattern. 3 chimes. Pause. 2 chimes. My skin prickled. I knew that sequence. Search teams used it occasionally to signal a found trail or an urgent regroup. But hearing it now in this forest, where no search teams were operating, someone was imitating it. Someone or something wanted me to follow. My breath turned shaky, but training locked my legs into motion before panic could take over. I kept my flashlight high and my pace slow, letting the beam sweep back and forth across the trees while the bells echoed faintly through the night. They never sounded ahead of me, only off to the side, coaxing me sideways. Luring. No. Don't assume. Don't personify the unknown. That was how Rangers got themselves killed, projecting intention onto things that weren't human, that didn't think like us. But deep down, beneath the rational thought, I felt it. Curiosity. Expectation. An awareness following my movements as easily as my own shadow. The trees thickened as I walked, their trunks packed closer, their branches forming a jagged ceiling that swallowed the moonlight. The air cooled sharply, carrying a scent like wet stone and earth cracked open after a long freeze. A cave scent. But there were no caves near Ridgewater Loop. At least, none marked on any map. The bells fell silent. I stopped. The quiet didn't feel empty this time. It felt crowded, like dozens of breaths were being held at once, waiting for me to take another step. I didn't. I whispered into the darkness, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. Where are you? For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then a voice answered from the brush to my left, soft, trembling, unmistakably human. Here. I froze. It was a man's voice, weak, strained, not the rasping whisper from before. This was different, frantic, desperate, like someone clinging to consciousness. I turned toward the sound, but my flashlight caught only dense undergrowth, ferns and fallen limbs twisted together like a barricade of decaying green, no space for a person to stand. Help, the voice said again. Closer this time. I stepped forward slowly, brushing branches aside. Where are you? Keep talking. A third whisper, barely audible. Don't let it touch me. A knot tightened in my stomach. I pushed through the foliage until the trail behind me vanished completely and the forest swallowed me whole. My light flickered over uneven ground, roots coiled like traps, the earth sloping downward despite this being a flat stretch of mountain terrain. Then I saw him. He was lying half buried under a fallen tangle of branches, like he'd been dragged there and left. His clothes were shredded, not torn by teeth or claws, but ripped unevenly, as if by hands with too many joints. His breathing came in shallow bursts, each inhale a tremor. His face was pale beneath streaks of soil. His eyes were open, too open. He stared straight at me, pupils blown wide, whites trembling as he tried to focus. When the beam of my flashlight hit him, he flinched as if struck. "Don't turn it off," he whispered. "I won't," I said, already reaching for the radio. "I'm going to get help. Stay with me." He shook his head weakly. "No, don't call it." "I'm not calling it," I said slowly. "I'm calling dispatch." He started shaking violently, his voice rising in a broken gasp. No, don't say it out loud. It hears the numbers, it learns the patterns. That's why I stopped using." His words broke off into a harsh shiver. I didn't understand what he meant, but the fear in his voice was raw enough to slice through me. I crouched beside him, shining the light on his face so I could assess the damage. He wasn't bleeding anymore, but that didn't mean he wasn't hurt badly. A deep scrape ran along his ribs. His left hand was bruised, fingernails cracked like he'd clawed at rock. His right boot was missing entirely. "How long have you been out here?" I asked. His lips trembled. Since it knocked." My breath caught, the knocking. "What did you hear?" I asked carefully. He swallowed hard. "Same as you. It calls from the ground, from the trunks, from everywhere. It wants you to answer, and when you do." His eyes darted wildly to the dark tree line. "It gets closer." A cold shiver ran through my spine, pooling in the base of my neck. I kept my tone steady. "What did it look like?" He squeezed his eyes shut. "Tall. Thin. The shape is wrong, bends where it shouldn't. I ran, but it doesn't follow you normally. It appears ahead, cuts off the path." His breathing hitched. "It doesn't like the lights, but it learns. Oh God, it learns so fast." A sound cracked through the woods behind us, a twig snapping. The man grabbed my jacket with both hands, sudden strength erupting through fear. "Don't turn around, not slowly. It sees angles, sees hesitation. If you look for it, it knows." His grip shook violently. His voice dropped to a trembling whisper. I didn't answer it. I swear I didn't. It just kept knocking anyway. Snap. Closer this time. My pulse roared in my ears. I could feel the weight of something watching us from behind the thickest cluster of trees. A pressure, a quiet inhalation of the forest. The man's fingers dug into my jacket, his breath accelerating. "It's right there." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my flashlight. "Stay calm." He wheezed out a broken laugh. "You can't stay calm around something that doesn't breathe until it wants to." My throat tightened. "Listen to me. We're going to get you out. You just need to." "No," he whispered. "You don't get it." His voice dropped into a soft, agonized moan. It followed me out of the cave. Every muscle in my body went rigid. "What cave?" He pointed shaking fingers toward the trees. "The one that isn't supposed to exist. The one under the ridge. The old one. Locals don't talk about it. They won't even walk this far. They know. They all know. That's why they leave the offerings." Offerings. The carved stump offerings I'd passed earlier that season. Bits of food, trinkets, stones stacked in spirals. Not traditions. Warnings. "What's in the cave?" I asked quietly. He stared past me, eyes widening as if watching something step forward from the dark. His jaw trembled. "Not a creature, a memory, a secret the mountain wouldn't bury. It crawls out when someone gets too close." Before I could respond, a low groan rumbled through the ground, a vibration that traveled up my boots into my legs. The pine needles around us trembled. The earth felt alive under my knees. The man squeezed my wrist. "It found us." I turned my head slightly, only slightly, my peripheral vision catching movement on the edge of the clearing. Something was standing between the trees, tall enough to reach the lower branches, arms too long, a neck angled slightly to the side as if studying me. Not human, not animal, a silhouette carved from shadow and moonlight. Its chest expanded slowly, then knock. The sound wasn't a knock on wood. It was its hand tapping its own ribcage, calling us, calling me. The forest held its breath, and the creature finally exhaled. Its exhale wasn't warm or cold. It wasn't even breath the way humans know it. It pushed through the clearing like a wave of airless pressure, stealing the moisture from my mouth, flattening the pine needles at my feet. The sound had depth, like wind forced through a hollow chamber carved into the bones of a mountain. The forest seemed to shiver around it, branches bowing, trunks creaking softly like they were bracing themselves. The man beside me whimpered and pressed closer to the ground, trying to make himself as small as possible. Don't let it see your fear," he whispered, though his voice shook so violently the words barely formed. I couldn't tell him the truth, that fear had already swallowed me whole. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, pinned to the forest floor as if the creature's presence had rewired how my muscles understood movement. I forced myself to breathe, each inhale shallow and uneven. The creature tilted its head, the motion slow and deliberate. I couldn't see its face clearly, just the faint outline of something pale where features should be. Not eyes, not a nose, just smooth, stretched skin that seemed unfinished. A mask of something that had forgotten what humans looked like and was trying its best to remember. Its rib cage expanded again. Knock. The sound reverberated through the clearing as if echoing inside a cavern. The man beside me let out a strangled cry. "I didn't answer you," he whispered into the dirt. Please, I didn't answer." The creature stepped forward, one long, impossible stride, silent despite the weight that must have been behind it. The branches above it shook, not from its movement, but from whatever the forest sensed coming next. I pulled the man behind me, bracing between him and the figure. My rational mind was gone now. Instinct had taken over, the pure human response to protect someone injured. Even though I knew I couldn't fight this thing, even though I understood how small I was in its presence. The creature paused, as if acknowledging the change in position. Its head lowered, studying me, not curious, but considering. And in that moment of quiet assessment, I realized something cold and horrifying. The knocking wasn't calling us, it was calling someone, a specific person, and I had responded to it by coming here. I had answered. A whisper slid through the trees behind the creature, soft, almost coaxing. I couldn't understand the words, but the cadence was unmistakable. Calling. Summoning. Another voice, older, deeper, hiding in the forest's spine. The creature didn't turn toward the whisper. It didn't need to. The sound vibrated through its thin frame, as though the command resonated directly inside its chest cavity. The man grabbed my sleeve again. "It's not alone," he gasped. "There's more. Don't you hear them? They never come one at a time." I pressed him down gently. "Save your strength." He shook his head in frantic denial. No, you don't understand. They don't hunt. They watch. They wait for the right one, the one who hears the knock and comes closer, the one who listens. They want." He stopped. The ground beneath him trembled. A low, resonant sound, like something massive shifting beneath the soil, rippled outward in a slow pulse that made dust rise from the forest floor. The creature's head snapped toward the ground at the man's side, then back to me. Understanding. Calculation. It took another step forward. I raised my flashlight, gripping it so tightly my knuckles burned. The beam shook across its chest, flickering slightly like the creature's presence interfered with the batteries. Its rib cage rose. Knock. This time, the sound came with a vibration through the air that made my teeth ache. My heartbeat stuttered. The man let out a breathless sob, curling into himself as the creature's long arm extended toward us. Its hand unfurled slowly. Too slowly. The fingers were long, jointed wrong, bending with a strange elasticity. Each fingertip ended in a dull, rounded shape, not claws, more like hardened bone worn smooth by centuries of contact with stone. I couldn't move, could barely think. A soft breeze passed behind me, carrying a faint scent. Damp, mineral, like the interior of a cave. The man's voice cracked. "Don't let it take me back." That word, back, hit me like ice water. "What's in the cave?" I whispered without taking my eyes off the creature. He trembled violently. "It shows you things. Your memories. But wrong. Wrong in ways you can't forget. It takes the parts of you that don't belong in the light and hangs them on the walls like trophies." He choked on the last word. "And if you stay too long, they become you." The creature was close enough now that my flashlight picked up more details. Its skin wasn't smooth. It was cracked in thin lines like the surface of a dried riverbed. Dark material filled the cracks. Soil? Sap? Something older? Its face shifted. Not in expression, more like the features bulged beneath the skin, pushing against the surface, trying to shape something familiar. I watched, frozen, as the pale surface stretched subtly, forming the faint outline of cheekbones. A chin, a nose, a face. My face. My stomach dropped. The creature's unnatural height, its movements, none of it terrified me as much as this recognition. It wasn't merely watching. It was studying. Learning. The man grabbed my wrist weakly. It mimics what it takes. The creature leaned closer, head tilting to match the angle of mine. A perfect mirror, except for its eyes. It had none. The skin where eyes should be was smooth, unbroken, blank. A faceless version of me staring into my own gaze. Something deep in my mind buckled. A pressure built behind my eyes, like the creature was trying to peel back my thoughts with its presence alone. The forest around us dimmed, the moonlight fading as if sucked into its silhouette. I heard the whisper again, but this time it came from inside my own skull. Come back. My breath hitched. It wasn't a command. It was a memory. A voice I'd heard before. A voice from my past. One I'd buried. The creature stepped even closer. No, I said quietly, not sure if I meant it for the creature or the memory creeping into my mind. The man coughed wetly, pulling my attention back to him. Blood speckled his lips. His face had gone gray. It's pulling you, he whispered. Don't let it. Don't let it take what you're afraid of losing. That's how it traps you in the cave. He pushed something into my hand, a small, smooth stone etched with 3 spirals. Locals leave them for protection. You have to hold it tight. Don't let go. Don't. His words cut off abruptly, his breath escaping in a final trembling gasp. I shook him lightly. Hey, stay awake. Stay. But his eyes had gone empty. Not peaceful. Empty. His chest didn't rise again. The creature lifted its head as if smelling the moment of death. The forest around us seemed to still further, the air thickening. Then slowly, it pointed at me. Not a threat, an invitation, a command. And behind it, deep among the trees, something else knocked. Not on wood, not on bone. It sounded like stone cracking open. The scent of cave air thickened around me. The creature stepped back, giving me space to follow. And even though terror fought to root me to the ground, I knew this wasn't over. The forest wasn't letting me leave. Not yet. The creature's retreat wasn't a mercy. It was an opening, an expectation. Its long frame drifted backward between the trees with the weightless ease of something not entirely bound to muscle or bone. The shadows swallowed it inch by inch until its pale, faceless imitation of me faded into a smear of moonlight. But I felt it watching. I felt them watching. The forest seemed to exhale around me, a low moan carried through the pines as if the trees themselves mourned the man who lay still at my feet. My fingers tightened around the etched stone he'd pressed into my palm. 3 spirals, each one carved with a trembling hand, a symbol meant to keep something out, or something in. I didn't know yet. But the stone felt warm against my skin, alive in a way stone shouldn't be. Its edges pulsed faintly like the beat of a distant heart sinking to mine. Behind me, branches rustled. Light footsteps, human, small. I spun toward the sound, flashlight steady, every nerve braced for something tall and wrong to emerge again. But instead, a figure stepped out from behind a cedar. A girl, no older than 13, hair dark and tangled from running through brush, eyes too wide, too bright. Her clothes were worn but not torn. A flannel shirt buttoned crookedly, mud on her jeans, bare feet scratched and bleeding. She stepped into the moonlight and stared at me without blinking. My voice caught in my throat. Hey, it's okay. I'm a ranger. Are you hurt? Where are your parents? Her gaze flicked to the man's body, then back to me. No emotion, not fear, not shock, just a quiet, unsettling study of my face. They don't come for you if you don't follow, she said softly. Her voice was clear, calm, almost rehearsed. I swallowed hard. Come for who? Her eyes moved past me into the forest, the direction the creature had gone. Them. I stepped toward her carefully. Are you lost? How long have you been out here? She shook her head. I live here. My stomach dropped. You live in the forest? In the caves, she said. Every muscle in my body went rigid. She continued with a tone that didn't match her age. Too steady, too practiced. That's where they talk. That's where they learn. That's where we listen so we don't forget. Her words made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. A strange recognition prickled along the back of my neck. Are there others with you? I asked. She nodded. There used to be. The way she said used to made the forest feel colder. What happened to them? She blinked slowly. They followed too far. The night deepened around us, swallowing the air between her words. She took a small step closer. You heard the knocking, so you came. That means it chose you. A chill slid into my spine like a knife. What chooses? The thing that remembers the old names, she said. The one that knocks from the deep places. The one that listens when you pretend you don't hear. Her voice dropped lower. The one the mountain hid. I took a slow breath, my throat tightening. What's your name? She blinked once, twice. Her lips parted slightly. Then she whispered, You don't remember me? The world tilted. My mind tried to catch on to something, anything that would make her words logical. I searched her face, the shape of her cheekbones, the angle of her eyes, a faint scar above her eyebrow. Something tugged at memory but remained clouded, distant, unreachable. I don't, I whispered. She stepped closer until she stood 3 feet from me, small and still. You used to tell me stories by the river. You used to say the forest wasn't alive, that it just felt like it was. Her expression tightened, barely perceptible. You didn't believe me when I told you the river talked. My skin crawled. I've never. But the certainty cracked even as I spoke. She tilted her head, mirroring the creature's earlier movement in a way that made bile rise in my throat. You forget because it wants you to forget. It takes pieces when you get too close. That's why no one remembers us when we come back. I stepped back instinctively. The forest around us darkened, not from clouds, not from moonlight fading, but as if the trees themselves had shifted, drawing in closer, forming a circle. The girl's voice softened. You left once. You didn't look back, but I did. That's why I stayed. A sharp vibration rippled through the ground. The girl flinched, her breath catching. It's coming, she whispered. A crack split the night, loud, deep, like the earth's spine snapping. Birds exploded from the canopy, though I heard no wings, only the absence of sound that followed. The girl's expression changed for the first time. Fear, pure, childlike fear. She grabbed my hand. Her skin was ice cold. Don't let go of the stone. Whatever happens, don't let go. The forest went eerily still. Then, knock. This one didn't come from the trees or the ground. It came from beneath us. The earth shuddered, the soil beneath my boots trembling as if something massive was pushing upward. Roots snapped under the forest floor, shifting and twisting. The girl tightened her grip, pulling me backward. Another knock. Louder, closer. A crack opened in the soil 10 feet away. Small at first, just a hairline split, then widening, spreading like a jagged wound across the clearing. The air pouring out of it was warm, thick, heavy, with the unmistakable scent of something ancient. Cave air, but deeper, older, like stone that had never tasted sunlight. The girl shook her head violently. We have to run before it climbs out. A pale limb burst from the crack, longer than it should be, joints bending in unnatural angles as fingers clawed at the earth. Soil poured from its grip as it pulled itself upward, inch by inch. The creature from the trees was nothing compared to this. This one wasn't learning to mimic humans. This one had forgotten humans ever existed. It rose higher, torso emerging from the earth, ribs protruding like roots torn from the ground. The shape of a head, elongated, featureless, pushed into open air. It let out a low groan so deep I felt it in my bones. The girl stumbled backward, dragging me with surprising strength. Move, move, move. The creature's chest expanded. Knock. The trees shook violently, leaves raining down like ash. The forest felt alive with terror, as if every living thing had learned to fear this exact sound. The girl pulled hard on my arm. Run! But before my legs could move, the creature lifted its head and turned directly toward me. though it had no eyes to see. It had followed the knocking inside me. It had followed memory. And when its featureless face stretched, slowly, impossibly, into a faint echo of my own features, I finally understood what the girl meant by the one it chooses. The mountain hid it, the cave birthed it, and now it wanted me. The creature dragged itself fully from the earth, a crack widening beneath it with a grinding moan that sounded like stone shearing against stone. Dirt cascaded down its elongated limbs. Ribs expanded like bellows, drawing air for the first time in centuries. The featureless head tilted toward me, its blank face shifting as though trying to mold itself into something recognizable, trying to become me. The ground shook again, the vibration rising through my legs into my spine. The girl tugged at my hand, nails digging into my palm. "We have to go now," she whispered, but her voice trembled with a new kind of fear, one that wasn't for herself, one that was for me. I forced my legs to move, stumbling backward with her as the creature clawed its way free. The spiraled stone in my hand pulsed violently, as if warning me, as if begging me, "Don't let go." We tore through the underbrush, branches slapping against my arms, pine needles cutting into exposed skin. The forest no longer felt like earth and trees. It felt like a body convulsing around us, roots twisting, trunks creaking, shadows pooling into shapes that moved when I didn't look directly at them. Behind us, a sound split the night. Not a growl, not a roar. A knock so loud the ground heaved. We fell together, dirt exploding beneath us as the vibration rippled outward. My flashlight tumbled out of my hand, but I caught it before it rolled down a slope I hadn't realized we were near. The beam jerked across the trees. I almost wished it hadn't, because the creature from the ridge had returned. The tall one, the mimic, the one that had studied my face. It stepped from behind the cedar with a grace that made my stomach hollow. Now that the thing from the earth had emerged, the mimic looked almost fragile beside it, but its faceless head turned toward me with unmistakable intent. It lifted its hand. Knock. Behind us, the cave creature repeated the motion, pounding its own chest cavity with force that cracked something deep inside it. The echo reverberated off the trees, off the mountainside, off the inside of my skull. The girl clutched my arm. "They're calling each other." My mouth felt full of sand. "For what?" "For you," she whispered. The forest around us suddenly brightened. Not from the moon. Moonlight doesn't rush upward from the ground. Pale illumination seeped through the cracks in the earth like breath, lighting the trunks, the roots, the stones. Shadows retreated into wrong shapes. The girl yanked me toward the slope. "This way." We slid down together, dirt and pine needles cascading with us. The hill opened into a narrow ravine lined with boulders and twisted roots. My flashlight beam bounced wildly across the rock walls. The knocking followed us. First one creature, then the other, then another. A third set of knocks, distant but approaching fast. My chest tightened. "How many are there?" The girl shook her head frantically. "I don't know. No one knows. They don't come from one place. They come from all the places the forest remembers. Old tunnels, buried hollows, caves the mountains sealed when people started building roads." The ravine narrowed until we had to turn sideways. The girl squeezed through easily. I had to lift my arms and twist to keep from scraping against the jagged stone. Behind us, the knocking grew louder, closer, faster. The girl leaned in and whispered, "Don't answer it. Don't react to it." That's how they know what you are. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. "What do you mean?" She looked up at me, eyes reflecting the flashlight beam like a trapped animal. "They look for people who listen. People whose minds bend before their bodies do. People who carry memories the mountain can use." "What memories?" Her voice cracked. "Yours." I felt something shift inside me, an unease I'd been ignoring since the moment she stepped into the clearing. A tug at the edge of a memory I couldn't quite reach. "Why do you know me?" I asked softly. She opened her mouth to answer. A knock behind us silenced her. This one wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be. It was soft, deliberate, a tracing of knuckles across rock right at the mouth of the ravine. We turned as one. The mimic stood halfway inside the narrow opening, its elongated arms braced against the rock walls. It shouldn't have fit through. Its body was too long, too angular, but it folded itself inward, collapsing its shape in slow, unnatural contortions until it filled the passage completely. Its head swelled and shifted again. My face. Closer this time. Sharper. Clearer. The girl screamed. I grabbed her and pulled her behind me, but the ravine trapped us. No room to run. No room to climb. Roots hung from the rock like ropes, but nothing we could reach. The creature reached out, long fingers gliding toward my neck. The stone in my hand burned suddenly, searing hot. I cried out and almost dropped it, but the girl grabbed my wrist. "Hold it," she shouted. The stone pulsed harder, spirals glowing faintly, light leaking through my clenched fingers. The creature froze, its faceless head tilted sharply as if recoiling from sunlight. The skin cracked along the outline of its borrowed features, revealing something darker beneath. It hissed, not aloud, inside my head, a jagged whisper ripping through my thoughts. "Give it back." I clutched the stone tighter, fighting the instinct to drop it. What is this? What does it want? The girl pulled me backward, her voice shaking. "It wants the memory you don't remember." "What memory?" She met my gaze, eyes brimming with something like grief. Me. The ravine shook, not from the mimic, from the cave creature clawing its way down the slope toward us. Its massive form scraped against the stone walls, the staff showering dirt and pebbles. Behind it, a third silhouette crested the ridge, thin, tall, bending sideways to fit through the pines. We were surrounded. 3 of them. 3 knocks echoed at once, the combined force shaking dust loose from the ravine's ceiling. The stone pulsed violently in my hand, then cracked. A hairline fracture split one of the spirals. The girl gasped, "No, don't lose it. Please, if you let go, they'll take you back." My voice broke. "Why do they want me?" The mimic leaned closer, pressing its pale forehead against mine through the narrow gap. Its skin was cold, so cold it burned. My flashlight flickered as something pressed into my thoughts, peeling them backward like pages. Voices. Water. Cold hands. A river, a scream that wasn't mine. "You left." The girl sobbed. "I waited for you. You said you'd come back. You said the forest wasn't alive, but it was. It is, and it remembered you before I did." The mimic's hand closed around my wrist. The stone shattered. Light burst outward, blinding and silent, flooding the ravine in a wave of white fire. The creatures recoiled simultaneously, limbs contorting, heads snapping back as cracks tore through their forms. The girl shielded her face with both hands. I felt the ground drop beneath me. The world folded. The forest vanished. Then, I was lying flat on my back in the middle of Ridgewater Loop Trail, dawn light filtering through calm, silent pines. My radio hissed softly beside me. The dirt was undisturbed. No footprints, no ravine, no cave, no girl. But the spiraled stone lay beside my hand, cracked cleanly into 3 perfect pieces. And when the breeze passed through the trees, I heard knocking. Soft, slow, from far below the forest floor, calling me by a name I didn't know I'd forgotten. I've learned that the woods don't need to roar to scare you. Sometimes, all it takes is the softest breath of wind across the pines, sliding through the needles like something whispering your name, and suddenly your whole body knows a truth your mind refuses to accept. You are not alone, and whatever stands with you in the dark is older than your fear can grasp. My name doesn't matter nearly as much as the forest that shaped me, but for the sake of whatever you take from this, I'll give it anyway. I'm Mark, 43, senior ranger assigned to the Northern Cascades of Washington State, a place where mountains fold into each other like sleeping giants and pines stand so tall they blot out half the sky. I've walked these woods long enough to know the sound of every bird, every creek, every shifting gust of weather that rolls off the ridges. Long enough to know the difference between natural silence and the kind of silence that tightens around you like a hand. People assume rangers are fearless, or at least immune to the strange things others swear they hear at night. Branches tapping on tents, distant howls that don't match any animal they can name, the heavy footsteps circling campsites when they think we're too far away to come help. fear doesn't skip anyone. It just learns your schedule. I grew up in the shadow of these forests. My father worked timber. My mother volunteered at the small local museum that showcased artifacts from logging days and older tribal stories. Stories she never called legends, just older truths. I didn't understand that phrasing until much later. Back then, the woods were a playground, a place to run, to shout, to test myself against slopes and rivers. As a ranger, I returned with adult eyes. The same trails I ran barefoot as a kid now carried a weight I could feel in my bones. Maybe it was responsibility. Maybe it was respect. Or maybe, like some of the older locals told me, the woods reveal different faces depending on what part of your life you're in. They said the young see adventure, but the grown see warnings. I didn't believe them at first. I was trained, disciplined, calm under pressure. I knew how to track, how to read weather, how to handle emergencies. I always figured fear was something you packed away, just like your gear, tucked tight, sealed, efficient. But I was wrong. Fear isn't a weakness. Fear is a language. And the woods started speaking it to me long before I admitted I understood. The first story I tell people, the one that still shakes loose inside me when I'm alone at the lookout tower, happened during my second year on duty. I was 30, stubborn, and carrying around the kind of quiet arrogance that comes from thinking you've got nature figured out. That was the same year locals began talking more openly about the thing in the pines. Older residents said, like it was normal, like discussing the weather or the best place to buy groceries. They never said what it was. Just the thing. One evening, around late September, I was called to check out a remote trail after reports of strange screaming echoing from the upper ridge. Hikers said it didn't sound like an animal, didn't sound like a person either. Something between. Something stretched too thin. I remember gripping the radio tighter than I needed to as the dispatcher relayed the details. I tried to laugh it off, told myself I'd find nothing but a cougar or a distressed elk. But when I stepped out of the truck and into the evening air, I noticed something I couldn't rationalize away. The forest smelled wrong. Not like pine, not like soil, not like cold stone. Instead, it carried a thick, metallic scent. Almost like rust or blood, but also like wet fur left out under the rain and sun for too long. It made my skin crawl in a way I hadn't felt since childhood. The trail wound steeply upward, then cut through a narrow stretch of trees where the canopy grew so thick it felt like stepping inside a cave made of branches. My boots crunched quietly on the gravel path, then softened into the damp mulch deeper inside. Every few minutes, I'd hear a distant creak or a sudden burst of wind that brushed my ears like someone whispering too close, but no screams. There was a heavy stillness to the trees that night, not silence. Silence can be peaceful. This was something else, a pressure, a weight. I kept moving. Halfway to the ridge, I heard it. Not the screaming the hikers described, something much quieter, a single slow knock. It echoed from somewhere to my right. Could have been a branch, could have been a woodpecker, could have been the forest settling for the night. Any rational possibility would have satisfied me, but something felt off. The knock didn't repeat like a woodpecker's pattern. It didn't vary like a branch hitting another. It was deliberate. One knock, then another, 3 breaths later, then nothing. I stopped walking and held my breath, letting the cold creep into my lungs. My heartbeat felt too loud for the moment. Knock. This time behind me. I spun around, flashlight sweeping across the trees. Nothing. No animal darting away. No movement. The knock echoed as if inside the trunks themselves. I told myself to stay calm, but the truth was, a thin thread of doubt had already hooked itself into my chest. I'd heard strange noises before. Animals in distress, trees cracking under frost, rocks tumbling. But this was different. This felt like communication, like something announcing itself. When the scream finally came, it tore through the woods so violently that my whole body froze. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was deep, ragged, trembling, as though something massive was forcing its lungs to imitate a cry that wasn't made for its shape. It sounded almost confused or angry. My instinct was to run, but my job was to investigate. So I moved slowly toward the sound, every step sinking heavier than the last. The air grew colder, unnaturally cold, as if the forest itself inhaled and held its breath. When I reached the ridge clearing, I saw footprints in the mud near the tree line. Not human, not bear, not cougar. They were huge, deep, spaced far apart, farther than any person could stride. The toes were elongated. The edges, sharp like claws, had dragged forward instead of dipping cleanly. I crouched to examine them, my hands shaking without permission, and that's when I noticed the smell again. Stronger now. Metallic. Wet. Heavy. Then the knocking resumed. Not close. Not far. Everywhere. Dozens of knocks, slow, rhythmic, pulsing through the trunks like the entire forest was alive and angry, or warning me, or calling something closer. The scream returned, closer this time. I stood up, fighting the instinct, screaming inside my own head to get out. Rangers pride themselves on rationality, on staying calm, but reason isn't armor. In moments like that, reason feels thin, flimsy, breakable. As I backed away from the prints, something massive shifted between the trees. Branches bent, not snapped, but bowed, as if something brushing through them was tall enough to touch them lightly and strong enough to push them aside like grass. I never saw it fully. Only a shape. A towering silhouette between the trunks, impossibly wide at the shoulders, moving with a slow, deliberate gait. No roar, no growl, just that sickening rhythm of knocks continuing all around me, like the woods themselves were beating a warning drum. Before I knew it, my legs carried me backward down the trail. Not running, just fast enough that I wouldn't break into a sprint, fast enough that I could pretend I wasn't fleeing. The knocking faded only when I reached the first break in the trees, and the scent of metal thinned from the air. I didn't report the details. Not all of them. I knew better. Rangers have a delicate balance to maintain between honesty and public calm. I simply noted unidentified wildlife activity and recommended trail closure until further observation. But I didn't sleep that night, not because of what I saw, but because of what I felt. The forest watched me leave. I tried to tell myself the unease would fade with daylight. It didn't. When morning finally bled pale light through the kitchen window of my ranger cabin, the memory of those knocks still throbbed somewhere deep in my ribs. I sat with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring at the steamless surface as if it held an answer. It wasn't the creature itself that unsettled me the most. It was that the forest reacted to it. Knocking trees, metallic scent, the feeling of being watched. That wasn't animal behavior. That was territory shifting around a presence it recognized. Around noon, I drove into town to pick up supplies. The locals didn't ask much about ranger business unless they were worried about hunters or fire weather. But that day, when I stepped inside the general store, old Mr. Kellerman, who'd lived off the forest longer than I'd been alive, watched me with the tired patience of someone waiting for me to admit a truth he'd already accepted. "You heard it, didn't you?" he murmured while restocking canned beans. I froze with a bundle of rope in my hands. "Heard what?" He shook his head like I was a stubborn child. "The woods don't knock unless they're talking to something, or talking about something." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to, but because something inside me didn't want to hear more. Kellerman gave me a long, slow squint. "You rangers come and go, but the thing in the pines stays. Doesn't matter how many maps you draw. Some land doesn't belong to people." I forced a tight smile, paid for my supplies, and walked out. But even after I was back in my truck, the old man's words clung to me like sap. Some land doesn't belong to people. For weeks afterward, the forest felt different. Not hostile, just alert. I kept sensing something moving just beyond my periphery. On quiet days, when the wind slipped through the branches just right, I almost heard the faint echo of that knock again, though never as close or deliberate as before. It would have been easy to chalk the whole experience up to imagination, adrenaline, exhaustion. Most rangers eventually hit a point where they see or hear something unsettling. The woods distort sound, shadows play tricks, fear exaggerates. But there was no exaggerating the footprints, no rational explanation for the magnetic pull in the air, no dismissing how the trees themselves responded. I hoped, foolishly, that the encounter would remain a single note in my career, something I could tuck away as a rare anomaly. Then winter came. That's when the second story began. A thick snowfall blanketed the Cascades early that December. By the end of the month, the roads were a patchwork of ice, and the park received fewer visitors. That meant more time alone on patrols, driving long stretches of forest road with only static-filled radio chatter and the crunch of studded tires for company. One night, after doing a final sweep of campsites before a storm rolled through, I was heading back toward the station when a call came in. A local logging crew had reported strange sounds near an unused service road, something howling in a way they described as too human but too deep. They requested a ranger check it out. The service road was barely a road at all, just a narrow track cut decades before, now overgrown and barely navigable under the snow. I parked my truck where the trees grew too tight and continued on foot. My breath fogged into the air, drifting like ghosts into the branches overhead. Snow muffled everything. Footsteps, branches, even my thoughts. Half a mile in, I found the logging equipment abandoned. A skidder, its metal frame dusted white. A chainsaw, half buried. Fresh footprints circling the area, men's boots, at least 4 different pairs, leading off toward the tree line, then stopping abruptly as if the men had turned around fast and run. Something had scared them. Loggers don't spook easily. I swept my light across the trees. That was when I smelled it. Metallic, thick, wrong. That smell had no business being in a frozen forest. My heartbeat quickened, not because I was cold or alone or unprepared, but because scent is the one sense that doesn't lie. You can mishear, you can missee, but your nose knows when something doesn't belong. A low vibration rolled through the ground beneath my boots. Subtle, like the deep rumble of something shifting its weight far off in the woods. I steadied my light and took a cautious step forward. The vibration came again, then again. A rhythm. Slow. Heavy. Too heavy to be a deer or an elk. For a moment, I thought about turning back to call in backup, but the prints from the loggers stopped here. If anyone was hurt, time mattered. So I pushed deeper, my hand brushing the pepper spray on my belt. Not that it would do much good against anything larger than a cougar, but fear makes you reach for whatever reassurance you can. The trees grew denser as the service road dissolved into untouched snow. My boots sank with each step, muffling sound even more. The stillness felt absolute, so much so that when a soft crack echoed behind me, I spun around instantly, breath caught in my throat. Nothing. Just trees. Snow. Silence. Then it happened again, a second crack, but not behind me, above. I lifted my light. High above, at least 20 feet off the ground, a massive branch trembled, not from wind, not from snow sliding off. Something had gripped it, held it, used it. The branch bent down slowly, creaking under an immense weight I couldn't see. The beam of my flashlight shook in my hands as I followed the shadow crawling down the trunk. A long, wide silhouette eased downward with unnatural grace, each movement slow, deliberate, quiet. My mouth dried, my lungs forgot how to function. The thing reached the ground without a sound. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare. Snow muffled everything except the soft, steady inhale of whatever stood just inside the dark. I could feel it before I could see it, its presence pressing against me like a tidal wave pushing against a single rock. Then the knocking began, soft, measured, too close. Knock, knock, knock. My flashlight flickered over the tree trunks around me. The sound wasn't traveling between trees this time. It was coming from one source, and that source was standing right in front of me. I aimed my light at the shape. The beam hit something tall, much taller than any person, and impossibly broad. Thick, matted fur clung to a frame built like a nightmare, long arms hanging nearly to its knees. Steam rose from its body, drifting into the night air like smoke from fresh coals. Its face remained in shadow, but I saw the glint of ice catching on hair around its jawline, and I smelled that thick metallic scent radiating from it. My voice tried to form words, warnings, commands, anything, but nothing came. The creature stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, just knowing, as if it remembered me. My legs trembled, and for one terrifying second I thought I would crumple into the snow. But instinct, pure primal survival, kicked me hard, and I started backing away. The creature tilted its head slightly, watching, measuring. Then it exhaled, a deep, guttural breath that rolled across the snow like a warning. I didn't turn my back on it. I walked backwards slowly until the forest swallowed it again, the knocking fading with each step I put between us. Not a chase, not an attack, a message. When I reached the truck, my knees nearly gave out. The door frame was the first solid thing I'd held in minutes. I radioed in a generic report. No injured loggers found, area unsafe, crew should stay away until daylight. But the real truth settled into me like the cold itself. The thing in the pines wasn't wandering, it was patrolling. And now, it knew me. I didn't tell anyone at the station what I truly saw that night. Not because I feared being dismissed. Rangers hear unbelievable things all the time. But because speaking it aloud felt like giving it permission to follow me out of the forest. So I buried it under paperwork, vague terminology, and a recommendation that the service road be restricted until further assessment. But the forest wasn't finished with me. Winter dragged forward like a wounded animal, slow and unpredictable. Snowstorms rolled across the mountains with a bitterness I'd never felt in previous years. In January, temperatures swung hard, single digits at dawn, then a sudden warm spell by afternoon. Animals acted strangely, venturing closer to ranger cabins, pacing the tree line as if anticipating something unseen. Then came the disappearances. They were subtle at first, a pair of hikers overdue by 3 hours, then a solo backpacker failing to check in at a trail marker. The usual things that happen in wilderness areas. But it wasn't the frequency that unsettled me, it was the locations. Every missing person report formed a rough arc around the same stretch of high pines where I'd seen the creature descend from the branches. Search teams combed the area. Dogs sniffed out trails that led nowhere, circles looping back on themselves as if the forest were swallowing the tracks. One dog, a calm, seasoned bloodhound, refused to cross a certain point in the trail. Stopped dead, tail between its legs, whining with a desperation I've never heard from an animal. As for me, I started waking up in the ranger cabin at odd hours, convinced someone or something had been standing outside. The first night it happened, I brushed it off as residual nerves. By the fourth night, I was certain I'd heard something. And a tapping. Not on the door, not on the window, on the cabin wall. Soft, slow, spaced. Knock, pause, knock. The same rhythm that had echoed through the trees. I'd lie in bed, staring into the dark, forcing myself to breathe evenly, telling myself it was branches shifting under wind or snow falling from the roof. But every time I walked outside in the morning, the snow around the cabin remained untouched. No fallen branches, no animal tracks, no signs of anything brushing against the walls. By mid-February, I started keeping the cabin lights dim at night, as though brightness might draw something nearer. I hated that fear had wormed its way into my routine like that. I hated even more that it felt justified. But the moment that truly changed me, the moment that carved itself into the part of my mind I'll never clean out, came during a late evening welfare check at one of the backcountry lean-tos. A young couple had been camping deep in the North Range, a smart pair, experienced hikers, no reckless decisions in their track record. They'd reported unsettling noises around their camp the night before, but assured the station it was probably just wind. Still, something in the boyfriend's voice during that call struck me as off. Not afraid, exactly, but stretched thin. I decided to swing by their camp right before dusk, just to ease whatever tension they felt. Snow crunched under my boots as I approached the lean-to. No smoke curled from their fire ring. No lantern glow spilled across the snow. No voices. I called out their names. Silence. I swept my flashlight across the clearing. The first thing I noticed was the tent, still pitched, still zipped, but half collapsed like someone had exited it in a hurry. The second thing I noticed was the smell. That same metallic tang, faint but unmistakable. My pulse quickened. I reached for the tent zipper, my glove trembling slightly, and pulled it open. Inside lay their gear. Sleeping bags thrown aside, a flashlight smashed against the floor, a thermos knocked over and frozen at an awkward angle. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just the eerie stillness of a camp abandoned mid-thought. I stepped back and scanned the tree line. That's when I heard it. A voice. A whisper. At first, I thought it was a trick of wind swirling between the pines, but no wind I've ever known forms words. And this one did. It said a name, not mine, the boyfriend's name. Soft. Breathless. Wrong. I froze, every muscle in my legs coiling like a spring. The whisper came again, carried on air so cold it felt sharp against my skin. Then something else followed. Movement. Heavy, slow, coming from deep within the pines. At that distance, I shouldn't have heard footsteps. Snow absorbs sound. But whatever moved out there wasn't stepping on snow the way anything natural would. It was dragging weight, shifting enormous mass, pushing the cold around it like water parting around a whale. My flashlight beam flickered over the tree line. Between two trunks, I caught a glimpse of something pale. Not fur this time. Skin, a massive hand gripping the bark. Long fingers curled around the trunk like roots wrapping stone. My breath hitched sharply. The hand tightened, the bark cracked. Then I heard it. Knock. Not from a tree. Not echoed. From the creature itself. It struck the trunk with its knuckles once, twice, then fell silent. A sick understanding hit me. The knocking wasn't a warning, it was communication. Calling to others. I didn't wait to see the body behind the hand. I backed away slowly, heart thundering against my ribs hard enough to make me lightheaded. As I moved, the whispers began again. Not words this time, but sounds shaped like words, attempted syllables, like someone trying to mimic human language without understanding how vocal cords work. One syllable stuck out, stretched thin, forced through a throat too deep. Come. I turned and moved as fast as I could without breaking into a run. Every survival instinct screamed that running would trigger something far worse. My boot hit a hidden root, nearly twisting my ankle, but I managed to keep upright. The clearing thinned behind me. The trail unfolded ahead like salvation. When I reached the point where the trees loosened and the sky reappeared overhead, the whispers faded. The footsteps stopped. The forest exhaled. But one thing followed me out. The knocking. This time not echoing, not distant. Tap. On a tree to my left. Tap. Now on one behind me. Tap. To the right. A pattern. A message. A map. Calling something closer. I forced myself to keep walking, every nerve in my body screaming to sprint to the truck. When I finally reached it, I slammed the door closed and gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened. In the rearview mirror, the tree line stood motionless. Too motionless. No swaying branches, no shifting shadows, no disturbances in the snow, as if the forest were holding a breath again, swallowing whatever watched me. The couple was never found. Officially, they're still listed as missing. Unofficially, every ranger who's heard my report avoids that area when they can. Even the dogs refuse to track it. And me, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Not because of the creature, but because of the whisper. Come. Something out there didn't just know me. It wanted me. After the couple vanished, the forest settled into a strange calm, an unnatural quiet that made every shift of wind feel like a misstep. I forced myself to function, to make my rounds, to speak to hikers with the same steady tone I'd practiced for years. But beneath the uniform, beneath the composure, something inside me had begun to unravel. Every time I stepped into the pines, I felt watched. Every time the wind moved in the wrong direction, my pulse quickened. Every time I passed that northern ridge, a knot tightened behind my ribs like an old scar pulling itself open. And the worst part? I didn't tell anyone. Not because I feared being believed or disbelieved. Fear makes you stop caring about reputation. I kept silent because saying the truth out loud felt like carving a trail straight to my cabin door. As long as I held the story inside, maybe the creature wouldn't cross the invisible line that separated the forest from whatever small piece of life I still controlled. That illusion didn't last. The knocking started again in late March. Not outside the walls this time. Not in the forest. From under the cabin. The first time it happened, I was cooking a late dinner, trying to convince myself I could still enjoy something as ordinary as warmth and routine. The pan hissed. The kettle whistled. And beneath the floorboards came a sound so subtle I almost mistook it for my heartbeat. Tap. A long pause. Tap, tap. I froze with the spatula still in my hand. Another tap rose through the wood, slow, distinct, as if coming from something too patient, too confident to rush the message. My throat tightened. The cabin wasn't large, just a single main room, a small bedroom, and a short crawl space beneath. Anything knocking from under there would have to be belly down, contorted. Too big to fit. Too big to belong. I crouched and pressed my ear toward the floor without thinking. The knock vibrated through the planks, closer this time, like a finger dragging lightly underneath. Something learning the shape of the cabin, mapping where I slept. I stood up fast enough that the chair toppled, the knocking stopped, and in the silence that followed, something colder settled into me than the cabin's drafts ever could. The knowledge that the creature was no longer tied to the deep woods. It was moving with purpose, with intelligence, with intention. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by the window with a flashlight balanced on my knee, staring into the dark while the woods pulsed quietly around the cabin. Nothing approached. Nothing knocked again. But the silence felt staged, as if the forest were watching to see what I would do next. By morning, my coffee tasted like metal. The next day, I drove into town under the pretense of needing extra supplies. But really, I was searching for something else. Confirmation. The locals always noticed things before we did. Animals behaving strangely. Unexplained noises. Trails that suddenly felt wrong. At the diner, old hikers and off-season hunters gathered near the back, telling their usual stories. I listened from a corner booth. One man mentioned hearing branches moving at night, too high up for any animal he knew. Another said he saw a shape near the logging road, tall enough to blot out headlights for a second. A teenage girl wiping tables muttered that something had been pacing behind their shed at night. And then Kellerman, his voice low, brittle from cold years, spoke from his seat by the window. "Spirits of the pines are restless again," he said without looking up from his coffee. "Every few decades they wake, sometimes hungry, sometimes angry, always curious." A younger man scoffed. "Spirits? Come on." Kellerman didn't blink. "Call them what you want. But they're older than this town, older than the tribes, older than the ice that carved these mountains. They've got long memories." His eyes lifted then, directly at me. "And sometimes," he added softly, "they follow the ones who notice them." My stomach clenched as if something inside me recognized those words before my mind did. I left the diner without finishing my meal. By afternoon, rain began to fall. Light at first, then heavy enough to blur the world into smears of gray. I drove slowly back toward the station, nerves stretched thin. When I turned onto the long gravel road leading toward the cabins, something felt off. The tracks, mine from that morning, they were gone. Rain can erase footprints, but not tire impressions. Not so completely, not so cleanly. The gravel looked freshly churned, smoothed in a way that suggested not weather, but weight. Heavy weight, as if something massive had walked the length of the road and dragged its feet. My hands tightened around the wheel. I parked 20 feet away from the cabin, scanning the tree line. No movement, no sound, only the rain ticking against the metal roof. Inside, the cabin was still. Too still. The faint scent of wood smoke hung in the air, but I hadn't lit a fire since the previous night. My boots left damp prints across the floor as I walked slowly through the room, checking the corners, the windows, the door. Everything looked normal, until I noticed the floor near the bed, a thin line of dirt, perfectly straight, as if something had dragged a finger or claw beneath the boards, tracing the floor from one end of the cabin to the other. My breath hitched. There were no holes in the floor, no loose planks, no openings from the crawl space. Something had moved underneath anyway, something large enough to shift the soil. I stepped back, pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. My legs wanted to run. My lungs wanted to collapse. My instincts wanted to claw their way out of my chest, screaming at me to get out of the cabin while I still could. But the fear didn't reach its peak until I heard something above the rain. Breathing, not my own, deep, slow, heavy, coming from directly outside the window. I turned my head, barely daring to exhale, and saw a silhouette standing beyond the glass. Tall, wide, still. Its outline distorted by rain, but unmistakable. Shoulders too broad, head too high, arms hanging lower than any human's. It wasn't moving. It was watching. The woods behind it looked darker, like its body absorbed whatever light the sky offered. My hand crept toward the flashlight, thumb trembling over the switch. But something inside me froze at the last second. I didn't want to see its face. I didn't want to shine a light on something that had learned the layout of my cabin, followed my movements, traced my walls, whispered human syllables into the clearing. The silhouette tilted its head slightly. I felt it before I saw it, that shift in pressure, that inner quake, the air thickening like a storm about to break, the same presence I felt on the ridge, the same weight that had descended the tree, the same awareness that circled the couple's camp. Then came the knock. Not on the cabin wall, not from the crawl space, not from the forest. It tapped the glass, a single perfect note. I stumbled back so fast I struck the table behind me. The silhouette didn't move. It didn't knock again. It didn't need to. The message was clear. I wasn't in its woods anymore. It was in mine. The silhouette stayed at the window for so long that time lost its shape. Rain streaked down the glass in trembling lines, distorting the figure until it looked like a smear of shadow pressed against the world. Every second stretched thin, stretched wrong. I didn't blink. I barely breathed. I waited for it to move, for it to vanish, for it to do anything other than stand there and breathe. But it didn't. It just watched. The knock it had left on the glass still vibrated faintly in my bones. When the creature finally stepped back, it did so slowly, fluidly, like whatever intelligence lived inside that massive frame wanted me to absorb the moment. Its shape withdrew into the pines. The darkness swallowed it whole, and then it was gone. Not retreated. Not fled. Gone in the deliberate way a predator withdraws when it knows the prey has nowhere left to run. I stood in the cabin for nearly 20 minutes before my legs remembered how to move. I didn't bother packing a bag, didn't bother securing the cabin. I grabbed my coat, my radio, and my keys and stepped outside into the rain. The forest no longer smelled like rain-soaked pine. It smelled like the creature, metallic, wet, heavy. I walked quickly to the truck and shut the door with a trembling hand. My breath fogged the windshield as I twisted the ignition, half expecting a massive shape to appear in the rearview mirror. It didn't. The truck rumbled to life, headlights spilling across the road like two weak beams drowning in shadow. I gripped the wheel and started down the gravel path. That's when the knocking started. Not from the woods, not on the cabin walls, but from somewhere behind the truck. At first, I thought it was gravel flicking against the metal undercarriage, but gravel doesn't knock in perfect rhythm. Knock, pause, knock, knock. My throat went dry. I pressed harder on the gas. The truck lurched forward, fishtailing slightly as the tires struggled for grip on the wet gravel. The knocking continued, louder now, closer, as if something massive was pacing behind the truck, matching my speed. I glanced into the side mirror. Darkness, no shape, no reflection. But the knocking didn't stop. It followed me all the way to the main road, where the forest thinned into open air and the mountains rolled gently like sleeping beasts. Only then, only when the first hint of civilization lay ahead, did the sound finally fade, swallowed by the storm. When I reached the ranger station, I sat in the parking lot for a long time with my hands gripping the wheel like it was the only anchor holding me on this side of reality. I knew I had two choices. I could report the creature, tell everything, every knock, every whisper, every moment I felt its breath sliding through the trees like a warning. But deep down, I knew no one could help. No one could find it, catch it, stop it. You don't manage something older than memory itself. Or I could confront it. The choice wasn't logical. It wasn't brave. It wasn't even sane. It was something closer to surrender, a recognition that the forest had marked me, singled me out, pulled me into a truth I couldn't unsee. I climbed out of the truck and grabbed the floodlight from the supply shed. If the creature wanted me, it would have me on my terms. Not inside my home, not in the dark, face to face. I walked back into the storm, away from the station, away from the safe glow of human lights, and crossed the open clearing toward the tree line. Rain soaked my coat, plastered my hair to my forehead, and blurred the world into streaks of silver. When I reached the edge of the pines, the forest breathed. A cold exhale rolled out from between the trunks, colder than the rain, colder than winter, colder than anything alive. My fingers tightened around the floodlight. I stepped inside. The trees closed behind me like a mouth. The knocking began in front of me this time. Slow, measured, guiding. I followed the sound deeper into the woods, deeper into the smell of metal and earth, deeper into the presence I'd spent months fleeing. My boots sank into mud, slipped on roots, brushed against branches that felt too warm, too alive. When the knocking stopped, the silence that replaced it felt like a trap snapping shut. I lifted the floodlight and swept it across the clearing. That's when I saw the cave. I'd patrolled these woods for over a decade, mapped every trail, every ridge, every game path, but I had never seen an opening like this. It yawned beneath a curtain of roots, its mouth dark and heavy like the forest's own heartbeat, pulsing beneath the soil. The smell pouring from it was suffocating, metallic, damp, ancient. Inside the cave, something moved. A shadow too large, too patient, too deliberate to be anything natural. I raised the floodlight, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The beam flickered across the entrance and caught the silhouette of the creature rising from the darkness, taller than it had any right to be, shoulders scraping the roots overhead. And behind it, deeper in the cave, something else shifted. More movement, more shapes. Voices whispered from the darkness, attempting words they didn't yet understand, mimicking syllables with throats shaped for a different language entirely. Human-like sounds stretched into something hollow, something wounded, something hungry. I stepped backward, not out of fear, out of understanding. This wasn't one creature. This was a den, a nest, a memory of things that had lived under the mountains since before the pines were saplings, since before the tribes carved stories into cedar, since before humans named the land wild. And they learned. They mimicked. They searched. I stumbled on a root as the largest of the shadows stepped forward, the same towering silhouette that had stood at my cabin window. Its eyes, not glowing, not animal, but deep, watched me with a strange, unsettling clarity. Not predator hunger, not malice, recognition. It knew me. It had always known me. The knocking resumed, not from trees, not from glass, but from the cave walls themselves. A deep, resonant sound like stone striking stone. A call. A gathering. I felt my heartbeat fracture into something raw and terrified. But underneath that fear, a single truth cut through. The forest wasn't warning me. It was choosing me. I backed away slowly, raising the floodlight with shaking hands. The creature tilted its head as if studying the light, its breath rolling through the clearing in slow, steaming pulses. The cave behind it filled with movement. Shapes shifting, shadows rising, whispers echoing like broken speech. I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my arms. Mud swallowed my boots. The floodlight cracked against a tree and went dark, leaving me stumbling blindly through a maze of trunks and wind and whispers. Something large moved behind me, pacing just out of reach, letting me run, letting me flee, letting me live. When I finally burst from the trees into the clearing near the ranger station, my legs gave out in the mud. The rain washed the dirt and blood from my hands. The forest loomed behind me, quiet, still, watching. The knocking didn't follow. Not that night. Not since. But sometimes, when the wind slips strangely through the eaves of my new home, miles from the Cascades, I hear a faint, slow tap that doesn't match the rhythm of the world. Sometimes I dream of the cave. Sometimes I smell metal in a place where no metal should be. And every so often, when I close my eyes, I see a tall silhouette standing just beyond the tree line, patient as time itself. waiting, not for me to return, but for the moment the pines whisper my name again, because some land doesn't belong to people, some fears don't fade with distance, and some spirits, the ones locals still whisper about in cold mountain towns, never stop learning the sound of your footsteps in the dark. The night the pines first breathed my name, I thought it was only the wind trying to warn me. Even now, after all these years walking the boundary between what's real and what we pretend is real enough, I still remember that sound, thin, urgent, almost embarrassed to exist. It threaded through the crowns of the trees as if it came from somewhere older than breath itself. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn. I didn't even reach for the light on my belt. Instead, I kept walking the trail like a man who knew his place in the woods and believed the woods knew theirs. That confidence was my greatest weakness. I didn't understand that yet. My name is not important anymore, but back then, people called me Ranger. I was 34, a decade into the job, stationed in a stretch of forest the locals treated with the same respect they'd give an unmarked grave. The Pines Rest District, 30,000 acres of fir and cedar, steep ravines that swallowed sound, and small towns where stories ran deeper than rivers. My station sat on the edge of it all, a wooden building the color of dried blood, leaning ever so slightly as if it had spent too many winters listening to what moved between the trees. I grew up in the woods, but these particular woods carried a stillness that unsettled even men like me. The first time I met some of the old-timers who lived near the boundary line, they asked where I was from. When I told them, they just nodded slowly, as though measuring how much of my life I'd already lived and how much I still had left to lose. Most rangers here lasted 2 seasons. A few lasted 3. Only one had made it past 5, and he quit without ever explaining why. I thought their fear was superstition, the kind passed from father to son, shaped by moonlight and too much whiskey. I thought nothing in these forests could shake a man who had already seen real danger, flipped ATVs, winter storms, missing hikers who turned up half alive, and mumbling nonsense. I took pride in my steadiness, but steadiness doesn't matter much when the ground under you shifts into something unrecognizable. My first month was quiet, filled with routine patrols and minor calls, campfire violations, lost tourists. One guy convinced a bobcat was stalking him when it was just his own shadow cast wrong by the lantern. But every night when the wind picked up, I'd hear something woven into it, not words, not exactly. More like a rhythm I recognized without knowing why, like knocking on a door I didn't remember building. It became a habit to stand outside after evening rounds, boots planted in the cold dirt, and listen. My coworkers teased me, calling me the night listener, but they didn't hear what I did. Maybe they didn't want to. One evening, while checking the northern trailhead, I met a local named Harlan. He was in his 70s, though his face looked carved from something much older. He wore a wool jacket even in warm weather and carried a walking stick whose handle was polished by decades of use. He watched me with the steady gaze of a man who knew what the woods could take from you. "You're the new one," he said without introducing himself. "I am." "You hearing things yet?" I almost laughed, but something in his voice made the humor dry up. "What kind of things?" I asked carefully. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed his stick toward the swaying tree line. "They come down when the light leaves," he muttered. "That's when the rules shift." I thought he meant cougars or black bears. I'd handled both before, but Harlan shook his head before I spoke. "Not animals," he said, "not the ones you can see." I tried to ask more, but he was already walking away, his boots silent on the dirt path. That night, the wind called again. And this time, I swear it pressed its mouth right against my ear. I blamed exhaustion. Long shifts can twist a man's senses if he lets them, but as the temperature dropped and the fog slid between the trunks like long white fingers, I felt something else, something watching me, patiently, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. During those early weeks, I kept a journal, not for work, but for myself. I wrote about the strange quiet in certain valleys, the odd footprints near the riverbank that didn't quite match wildlife patterns, the sudden pockets of freezing air on warm afternoons. I wrote about the dreams, too. Dark shapes crouched in the tree line, breath steaming in ragged bursts, eyes that glowed like wet ash. I'd wake with my heart hammering, but in the dream I never ran. I stood still, as if I were waiting for something to step forward and finish speaking. I didn't show those pages to anyone. Saying things out loud can give them power, and I wasn't ready for that yet. One night, about 2 months in, we got a report of a missing hunter. His name was Leo, mid-40s, known around here for being cautious and experienced, the kind of man who could walk these woods blindfolded and still find his way home. His truck was found at the trailhead, keys still in the ignition. That alone was enough to put a knot in my stomach. I joined the search team at dawn. The air was sharp, filled with the metallic smell of cold soil. Birds weren't singing yet, which bothered me more than I let on. Usually they chattered endlessly at sunrise. But that morning, the forest seemed to be holding its breath. We found tracks within the first hour, boot prints leading uphill, deeper than normal, as if he were walking with too much weight on his back. Then they suddenly veered off the established trail and cut into thick brush. That didn't make sense. Leo knew this land. He wouldn't wander blindly into terrain that could swallow a man whole. As I crouched to examine the prints, a breeze drifted down from the ridge. It carried a smell I couldn't place, musky, earthy, but tinted with something sour. It reminded me of wet fur left too long in the dark. I stood up fast. "Smell that?" I asked the others. One of the younger rangers shrugged. "Probably a bear." "Maybe. But I'd tracked bears before, and this wasn't their scent. Bears smelled heavy, like warm hide and soil. This was colder, sharper. Wrong. We followed the tracks another mile until they stopped abruptly near a fallen tree. Not faded, not trampled, just ended. I circled the area twice, 3 times. The prints led right up to the moss-covered trunk and vanished on the other side. No drag marks, no signs of a struggle, no broken branches. It was as if the man had stepped behind the log and dissolved into the air. One of the volunteers made a nervous joke about forest spirits, but nobody laughed. I knelt and pressed my palm into the earth. It was vibrating, barely, but enough that I felt the hairs on my arm rise. When I looked up, the trees above us were perfectly still, not a single needle trembling. We searched for 3 days. No tracks, no scent, no clothing, no equipment, nothing. The official report said Leo must have gotten disoriented and fallen into one of the deep ravines nearby. But I'd been to those ravines. If he'd fallen, we would have found something. A hat, a torn jacket, a snapped branch, but the woods had swallowed him clean. That night, alone in my cabin, I heard the breath again, not through the wind this time. From the corner of the room, it spoke my name. Soft, fragile, patient. I didn't sleep at all. I sat up slowly, every muscle pulled tight, listening to the dark corner of my cabin where the voice had come from. The room was cold, colder than it should have been. My breath drifted in front of me in thin white ribbons, and though the wind outside rattled the shutters, the air inside was still, too still, like the moment before a held breath is released. My name echoed again in my mind, soft as dust sliding down old wood. I couldn't tell if it had been spoken aloud or if I had carried it out of a dream. I kept staring into that corner, shadow layered over shadow, waiting for movement, waiting for something to step forward. But nothing moved. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the dawn crept in. A thin gray line spilled across the floorboards, and the cabin warmed just enough for the mist of my breath to fade. I didn't report what I'd heard. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, the lingering dread of the search for Leo. But a part of me knew better. The woods had been speaking to me for weeks. That morning, I realized they no longer needed the wind to do it. I tried to shake the feeling as the workday began. The missing hunter case was still open, and the district superintendent wanted every ranger on heightened alert. People disappear in the woods. It's a fact of the job. But Leo's case was different. There was no trail. No injuries, no signs of an encounter with wildlife. He simply vanished from a spot he should have known better than to enter. Before heading out, I stopped by the visitor center. A group of locals had gathered by the old bulletin board, their faces tense, their eyes sharp with suspicion. They spoke in low voices, and as I approached, they quieted, the way people do when they don't want the newcomer to hear. One of them, a woman named Clara, who ran the only gas station within 30 miles, stepped toward me. "You're working the search?" she asked. "Still am," I said. She looked like she wanted to say more, but weighed her words first, rolling them around in her mind as though deciding whether or not to unleash something dangerous. "Be careful where the trail ends," she said finally. "Not everything up there walks on two legs. Not everything leaves a mark." I asked what she meant. She didn't answer. Instead, she gave a tight nod as if to seal whatever was left unsaid and walked off. I spent the rest of the morning checking the northwest boundaries with my partner for the day, a ranger named Silas. He'd worked here longer than anyone I knew, a quiet man with a permanent squint, as if he was always looking for something he wished he'd never found. Even he seemed uneasy as we moved deeper into the woods. He paused often, head tilted, listening. "You hear that?" he asked once. "What? Nothing," he muttered. "Too much nothing." By noon, the air had grown tense, thick with humidity despite the cool temperature. Birds stayed silent. Even the squirrels seemed to hold their ground, perched on branches with their tails stiff, watching the woods the same way I did, waiting for something to move first. We reached an old cabin about 6 miles from the trailhead. It had been abandoned for decades, long before the Pines Rest District formed. People around here called it the Old Trapper's Shack, though no one could ever agree who the trapper was or what he trapped. Some said fur. Others whispered it was something that didn't have fur at all. The roof sagged like tired shoulders, and moss had climbed halfway up the walls. As we stepped closer, the air dropped suddenly. A breath ago, I'd been sweating. Then frost hit my fingertips. "We're not staying long," Silas said quietly. I didn't ask why. Both of us felt the shift. You don't question the cold spots in these woods. They're warnings. Inside, the shack was empty except for a rusted stove and a torn sleeping bag balled up in the corner. But the ground told another story. Fine dust lay everywhere, undisturbed, except for one track, small and round, pressed deep into the dirt. It looked human, almost. 5 toes, an arch, but the proportions were wrong, too wide. No one our size could leave an impression like that unless they were carrying far more weight than their frame allowed. Silas knelt beside it. "Seen prints like this before?" he asked. "No," he nodded, pressing his lips together. "You won't find them in any training manual." A chill crawled down my spine. "What made it?" He rose without answering. "Doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is it doesn't want to be followed." But there was another print, and another, leading out the back door into the trees. The tracks weren't fresh, maybe a day or two old, but they didn't fade the way normal prints did. It was as if something heavy had pressed down with such force that even time couldn't erase it. The trail curved downhill toward one of the ravines that fed into a cave system I'd been warned about since my first day. They were unmapped, unstable, and, according to the locals, older than anything we had language for. Some said the caves breathed in winter and whispered in summer. I used to laugh at that. But when we reached the ravine's edge, I stopped laughing. The trees bent inward at unnatural angles, branches twisting like stiff fingers clawing toward the ground. The earth felt hollow beneath my feet, as though something enormous moved below the surface. "We're done," Silas said abruptly. "We're supposed to be tracking." "We're done," he said again, sharper this time. That was the closest to fear I had ever heard in his voice. As we began climbing out of the ravine, a sound drifted up from below. Soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Not human breathing, something deeper, thicker, a sound that carried weight. I turned without meaning to, staring down into the shadows where the tracks disappeared, and as I looked, the trees shifted, not in the wind, in movement, Slow, deliberate movement, as if something large brushed past them from below, something that shouldn't fit in a ravine that narrow. "Move," Silas hissed. "Now." We climbed fast, faster than we should have, and as we did, the breathing grew louder. Not closer, just stronger, as if whatever made the sound was gaining confidence. We didn't stop until the shadows of the ravine were far behind us, swallowed by distance. Only then did Silas finally speak. "You know that hunter who went missing?" he asked. "Yes." "His tracks led to the ravine too, long before you joined the search." I stared at him, waiting for the rest. "He wasn't alone," Silas added. "There were other prints in the dirt that day. The same kind we just saw?" He nodded once. "And the same ones I've seen before." "For how long?" Silas hesitated, jaw tightening as if he were holding something heavy behind his teeth. "Since my first year," he said, voice low. "And I've learned something. Whatever makes those prints doesn't just watch people." He turned to face me fully. "It follows them." The woods around us seemed to lean closer. "And once it finds a voice it likes," he whispered, "it keeps whispering that voice to itself until the person listening finally answers." I felt the air shift again, a slow exhale from somewhere behind the tree line, a sound that knew my name. The moment Silas said it, the forest changed. The air thickened, the temperature dipped, and even the old pine trunks around us seemed to tense, like a circle of animals suddenly alert to a predator passing through. I tried to control my breathing, but every inhale felt sharp, cold, metallic, scraping against the back of my throat. I didn't want to ask the question forming in my mind, but something inside me, maybe fear, maybe stubbornness, forced it out anyway. "What do you mean it whispers a voice until the person answers?" Silas didn't respond immediately. He kept his eyes fixed on the tree line behind me, watching the needles tremble in a breeze neither of us could feel. "You heard it?" he finally said. "The night before last." My stomach dropped. "How did you know?" "You came into the station with that look. Happens to every ranger who lasts more than a season here. The same hollow-eyed stare, the same stiffness in the shoulders, the same silence when someone asks how you slept. It's the look of someone who's been spoken to." I looked away, but he put a hand on my arm, not comforting, not warning, just grounding. "Listen," he said, "don't answer it." I didn't. "Good, don't." We headed back toward the station in uneasy silence. I tried to listen only to our footsteps on the forest floor, but the woods felt alive around us, breathing, shifting, paying attention. There were moments when I swore I heard a soft cadence moving between the trees, a faint echo of my name, stretched thin like a thread pulled too tight. By the time we reached the trucks, my nerves were raw. Silas radioed in, letting dispatch know we were clear. I climbed into my vehicle, but didn't start it right away. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, staring at the gravel lot, trying to convince myself that whatever had spoken in my cabin had been some trick of the mind. But the mind doesn't create cold spots in the middle of summer. It doesn't bend trees. It doesn't leave tracks that press deeper than any human should. And the mind doesn't murmur your name from the corner of a room you know is empty. I drove home with the windows cracked, hoping the wind would clear my head. But the farther I got from the station, the stronger a heaviness settled in my chest. It wasn't fear, exactly. Not yet. Something more like pressure, like the feeling of standing at the mouth of a cave and knowing something is awake inside. When I reached my cabin, the sun was hovering low, the sky shifting into that strange hour where everything loses its color before night claims it. The woods behind my home stood silent, too still for the time of day. Usually the forest buzzed with insects at dusk. But now there was nothing. Not a hum, not a chirp, not a rustle. It felt like walking into a room where everyone had been talking and suddenly stopped the moment you entered. Inside, the cabin was warm, the kind of lingering warmth left over from daylight. But as soon as I shut the door, a draft slipped across the floor, cold and damp and unmistakably deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight even though the sun hadn't fully set. "Is someone here?" I called, hating how weak my voice sounded. Silence. I checked every corner, every closet, the tiny attic crawl space, the back door, nothing. No signs of entry, no footprints, no disturbed dust, nothing that would suggest a human presence. But the cold was undeniable. It pooled in the center of the room, coiling around my boots like fog trying to take form. I stepped backward until my shoulders pressed against the wall. My pulse thudded in my ears, loud enough I thought the whole forest could hear it. "Stop it," I whispered to myself. "You're letting the stories get to you." But then the cold air thickened, pressing against me. Not aggressively, tentatively, almost curiously. As if something unseen was trying to understand what I was. A breath, slow, steady, too close to be my own, brushed the side of my neck. I jerked away, heartbeat stuttering. The flashlight flicked across the empty room, empty except for a faint imprint on the floor. It was subtle, only visible when the light hit at a low angle, but I saw it clearly. A footprint, the same shape as the ones near the trapper's shack. Wide, heavy, too human to be an animal, too wrong to be a person. I stared at it for a long time, unable to breathe, unable to move. When I finally backed away, the beam of the flashlight trembled in my hand. "Get out," I whispered, to myself, to the room, to whatever had left that footprint. I grabbed my keys and left the cabin without packing a single thing. I drove until the trees thinned and the stars appeared above the open road, sharp and bright. Only when I was 15 miles away did my body begin to relax. Not all at once, just slowly, piece by piece, like a tightly wound spring finally easing. But even then, I didn't feel safe. Not really. The next morning I returned to the station, looking like a man who'd slept in his truck, because I had. The other rangers noticed immediately, but only Silas approached. "You felt it," he said quietly, confirming what I wasn't ready to say aloud. "It was in my cabin," I replied. My voice cracked. It stood in the middle of the room. Silas exhaled through his teeth. They don't usually go inside, not unless someone's already caught its attention. "What does that mean?" "It means you're in the stories now." I wanted him to be joking. I wanted him to laugh and tell me it was all just part of the local lore, the kind meant to scare rookies. But Silas wasn't the type to joke, and his eyes held the same fear I'd seen in the volunteers searching for Leo. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice, "there are things in these woods that existed before our maps, before the trails, before any of us gave names to the mountains and the valleys. Things that don't live by the rules we understand. They're not evil, not good, just ancient." "And they whisper names," I replied bitterly, "when they want something." "What do they want?" Silas clenched his jaw. "Sometimes they want your fear. Sometimes they want your attention. Sometimes they want you to follow. And sometimes—" He trailed off. "Sometimes what?" I pushed. He looked at me with a grief I didn't understand then. "Sometimes they want you back." The station phone rang before I could ask more. The sound made both of us jump, nerves stretched thin. Dispatch answered, listened, then waved us over. "We've got another call," she said. "Campsite disturbance. Northern Ridge." I felt my breath hitch. The Northern Ridge was near the ravine, near the caves, near whatever had followed me home. Silas met my eyes. "We go together." I nodded, but my stomach twisted. The wind outside picked up, brushing against the station windows with a slow, deliberate rhythm, almost like knocking, not random tapping, a pattern, a call, a whisper, a voice. My voice. By the time we reached the trailhead leading up to the Northern Ridge, the wind had died completely. The trees stood unnaturally still, their branches frozen in place as if waiting. The clouds overhead moved slowly, dragging long shadows across the canopy like bruises spreading across skin. Silas stood beside me, hands on his belt, jaw locked in a kind of bracing tension I'd never seen in him before. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you stay behind me." "I can handle myself," I shot back, partly because I meant it, partly because fear makes men say stupid things in order to feel taller. Silas didn't argue. He just gave me a look, tired, knowing, that stripped the bravado out of me quicker than a shout ever could. We began our climb along the narrow switchback that hugged the ridge's edge. The drop-off to the right plunged nearly 200 feet, lined with jagged stone and dense pine. The kind of place where sound disappeared before it reached the bottom. The kind of place where a scream might dissolve before another person could hear it. Halfway up, we heard it. Not a scream, a thud. Heavy, wet, rhythmic. Something hitting the ground again and again with too much force to be human footsteps, but too measured to be the random movements of an animal. Silas raised a hand, signaling me to stop. We listened. The thud came again, closer this time. Then a scrape, like something dragging across rock. The sound was faint, but carried a weight that vibrated in my ribs. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my breathing. Silas scanned the slope below us, his body held rigid. It's moving toward the ridge. What is? He didn't answer. The trail curved left, pushing us deeper into the shadow of the ridge wall. Here the air felt thicker, like walking into a place where sunlight didn't reach simply because it had been told not to. The silence grew oppressive. Even the wind refused to enter. Ahead, we saw the campsite, a single tent, collapsed on one side, its poles bent inward like something had pressed against the fabric from outside. The fire pit was cold, no gear scattered, no signs of an animal rummaging. "Where's the camper?" I whispered. Silas crouched beside the tent, fingers brushing the torn edge where the nylon had split. "Dragged," he murmured. Something pulled the tent open. "See how the fabric stretches toward the tree line?" I knelt beside him, tracing the same direction with my eyes. The pine needles there were disturbed, parted in a sweeping arc. Something massive had moved through. My chest tightened. A scent lifted from the ground, damp fur, moss, and something metallic, like rusted iron. The same scent I'd caught near Leo's last tracks. "We need to follow," Silas said. I felt dread swell beneath my ribs. "Into the trees?" "Only as far as the trail remains visible." The trail lasted 50 yards. That was all. After that, the disturbed needles vanished, replaced by untouched ground. No prints, no broken branches, no sign of a struggle. Just silence so complete it made my ears ring. "This isn't possible," I muttered. But deep down, I knew it was. I felt the presence before I saw anything. A pressure in the air. A shift in the shadows. The hair on my arms stood up one by one. Silas felt it too. He stiffened and unholstered his flashlight, not a weapon, but a beam of truth in a place where truth warped too easily. "Don't run," he whispered. "Whatever you see, don't run." The words barely left his mouth before a crash echoed from the ravine below. The violent snap of wood, the rush of something enormous pushing through brush. A low sound followed. A cross between a grunt and a groan, vibrating with a resonance that made the ground beneath our boots tremble. My breath clamped in my throat. Something was climbing the ridge. Silas grabbed my shoulder. "Back up." Slow. We stepped backwards, inch by inch, toward the switchback. I kept my eyes fixed on the tree line, searching for movement, for the silhouette of something too tall, too broad, too heavy to belong here. But nothing emerged. That was worse. Something unseen was moving the trees, bending them, pushing them. I could hear it ragged, breathed heavy, like a massive animal exhausted from running. But the breathing wasn't random. It matched a rhythm, a familiar rhythm. My name. I didn't want to believe it, but the cadence was impossible to mistake. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. More like the shape of my name being molded from breath and weight and intent. Silas froze when he heard it. "It's calling you." The ground beneath us trembled slightly. "Don't answer," he said. "I'm not." "Good. It only needs you to acknowledge it." We reached the edge of the switchback, where the trail narrowed and clung to the ridge. The drop was a sheer fall. No options to retreat except forward or down. Silas moved first, stepping carefully, slow enough that each movement felt like a prayer. I followed, my boots scraping lightly across the thin crust of gravel. That was when the sound shifted. The breathing stopped. Then the rhythm changed. A new sound rose, a low groan, followed by a rumbling thud. Not footsteps, not climbing. Something jumped, something big, from the ravine. My heart lurched. Silas whipped around, flashlight aimed downward. For a moment, the beam cut through the branches, illuminating a massive shape dropping between the trees. It fell silently, impossibly silent, for something so large. Then it vanished into the undergrowth below without a crash, without a thump, without a trace. "What the hell was that?" I breathed. Silas didn't answer. His hand trembled on the flashlight. "Keep moving," he whispered. "We're not out yet." As we made our way down the narrow path, the forest behind us shifted again. The pines leaned as if stones had been thrown at them from below. The air tensed, building into a pressure that pressed against the back of my skull, urging me forward, urging me not to look back. But I did, just once. And in that moment, I saw them. Eyes, not glowing, reflective, like an animal's eyes catching the last threads of light, but set too far apart, too high off the ground, watching me, waiting. My legs weakened, my vision blurred, my instincts screamed at me to run, but Silas's voice cut through the panic like a blade. "Look away, don't let it anchor to you." I tore my gaze forward, gripping the rock wall as the trail began to widen again. My lungs burned, my heartbeat stuttered. Behind us, the forest inhaled and whispered. Not a word, a sound mimicking the rhythm of breath in my ear. A sound that rose in pitch until it scraped at the edges of thought. We didn't stop moving until the ridge was far behind us, the trees shifting back into something like their natural state. Only when we reached the trucks did Silas finally let out a long, shaky breath. "It saw me," I said, voice cracking. "It knows me." "It chose you," Silas said, and I wished he had lied instead. I leaned against the truck, legs shaking, vision swimming. I tried to breathe, to slow my pulse, to understand what I was now tangled in. "Why me?" I forced out. Silas stared into the woods as though searching for an answer buried in the dark. "You listened," he said. "Most people hear the whisper and ignore it, but you listened." He turned to me with a look that wasn't anger, wasn't pity, just truth. And now it won't stop until you understand what it wants. The wind finally rose again, rustling the treetops like normal, but its timing was too perfect, almost like a sigh of anticipation. I didn't go home that night. I didn't trust the cabin. I didn't trust myself inside it. Instead, I drove until the road widened and the forest backed away long enough to give me a breath that didn't feel borrowed. I parked beside an old Ranger turnout and sat there with the engine off, listening to the ticking of cooling metal and the distant whisper of wind threading through the branches. But even here, far from the ridge, far from the caves, I felt it. A faint pull in the back of my mind, like something was remembering me. Like something was turning its head in my direction. I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't, but because sleep felt like an invitation. As if the moment I closed my eyes, whatever had whispered my name would finally get a hand around me. I watched the horizon stain with morning light. Pale gold spilled across the pines, painting them in soft color. The warmth washed across my skin, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt normal again, as if sunlight could rinse away the dark, but the woods don't forget, and sunlight is only a truce. I showed up at the station with the exhaustion of years written across a single night. Silas noticed immediately, but he didn't comment, didn't scold, didn't nudge the truth out of me. He just poured a cup of coffee and handed it to me in silence. It was the superintendent who spoke first. "Found something," she said, tapping a printout on her desk. "A hiker turned in a photo from one of the ridge trails. Says he took it 2 days ago." She slid the paper toward me. At first, the image looked like nothing, just a blur of dark shapes behind a curtain of fog. Then my eyes adjusted, separating shadow from distance. A figure stood half hidden behind a pine trunk. Broad shoulders, long arms, head slightly tipped as if listening. The height alone made my breath freeze. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. But what made my stomach drop was its posture. It wasn't stalking or crouching, no, it was watching. Watching whoever took the photo. Watching the woods. Watching the world the way a person watches a door they expect someone to walk through. Silas studied the image in silence, jaw tightening. The superintendent glanced at us both. "Could be trick lighting," she suggested, her voice tight. "Could be pareidolia." But none of us believed that. "Where was this taken?" Silas asked. "Northern Ridge." "Of course it was," she sighed, rubbing her temple. "We're not equipped for this kind of—" She trailed off, searching for a word we all knew didn't exist. "Presence." She didn't call it an animal, didn't call it a threat, didn't call it anything at all, because naming something gives it a place in the world. Whatever this was didn't belong in ours. "Keep eyes open," she said finally, "and stay paired up. No solo patrols, no exceptions." Her voice held authority, but beneath it I heard fear. Everyone did. Silas caught me afterward near the truck. "You're not going home tonight," he said. "I wasn't planning on it." "Good." He paused, studying my face. "You feel it right now, don't you?" "Yes." "You can't let it in." I stared down at my boots. "How do you stop something that doesn't follow rules, that doesn't leave tracks unless it wants to? Something that chooses you?" "You don't stop it," Silas said quietly. "You survive it." He looked away toward the ridge, and shoulders sinking under the weight of years. "And you learn why it chose you." We headed out for patrol. This time we made for the valley floor, wide open spaces where the trees spread farther apart, places where shadows had to work harder to hide what they held. But even there, the woods felt wrong. At first it was subtle. Birds chirped off beat as if they were imitating the morning chorus but didn't quite remember the rhythm. Squirrels darted along branches, pausing mid-scurry to stare directly at us, unblinking, unnervingly still. Then the smell hit, cold earth, wet bark, and that same sour musk from the ravine. "It's close," Silas said under his breath. We moved slowly. Every snapped twig beneath our boots felt like a flare being lit in enemy territory. My senses sharpened to a painful degree, each shift in the wind, every flick of shadow, every twitch of grass. Then, at the edge of a clearing, we saw it. A cave entrance, one I had never noticed before. A split in the earth, hidden beneath roots that curled like knuckles gripping the soil. Cold air poured out of it, carrying with it the same rhythm I'd heard the night in my cabin, the cadence of breath shaped into the outline of my name. It wasn't speaking, not yet, just waiting. Silas reached out, gripping my arm. His hand trembled for the first time since I'd known him. "This is where they come from," he whispered. "They?" I echoed. He didn't explain. He didn't need to, because something moved deep in that cave, slow, deliberate, heavy enough to shake dust from the roots above. My feet edged backward on instinct. Silas didn't move. "They don't hunt," he said quietly. "They don't roam. They don't chase. Then what do? They invite." The word lodged in my skull like a splinter. The forest behind us fell silent all at once. Even the wind stopped, leaving the clearing suspended in a kind of breathless dread. A figure appeared at the mouth of the cave. Not fully, just enough. A shadow filling the entrance, tall enough that it had to hunch to avoid scraping the ceiling. Its shoulders were massive. Its head turned slowly, as if the motion itself carried ancient weight. The smell intensified, damp fur, stones, and something old enough to have never known sunlight. I felt its attention land on me. Not on Silas. On me. It leaned forward. Just a shift of weight, but enough to send the roots trembling. My name rolled out of the cave, not whispered, not spoken, just breathed. A vibration inside my bones. I stumbled backward. Silas grabbed me, pulling me away. "Don't let it bind you," he snarled. "Look away." But I couldn't. For just a moment I felt something else beneath the fear. Recognition. Deep, buried recognition, as if this presence had known me long before I had known the forest. The cave pulsed with cold. My vision blurred. The trees pressed inward as if listening. Something inside me leaned toward the sound, toward the shadow, toward the darkness curling like a beckoning hand. Silas shook me hard. "Don't answer," he yelled. The ground shuddered. The figure straightened slightly, inches of height rising into view, enough to reveal a sliver of its face through the dark. Not an animal, not human, something in between, something ancient. The breath that carried my name thickened, deepened, sharpened into a shape that begged for acknowledgement. A single word away, a single whisper, a single surrender. "No," I gasped, forcing the word out harder than any battle cry. The presence recoiled, not in fear, not in anger, but in disappointment so powerful it chilled my spine. Silas dragged me back into the tree line, away from the clearing, away from the cave. The forest resisted, branches catching on my clothes, roots grasping at my boots, as if trying to pull me toward that shadow again. But we reached open ground, sunlight breaking through the canopy in fractured beams. The presence didn't follow, not past the boundary of light. I collapsed against a fallen log, lungs burning, heart pounding like a fist against my ribs. The air felt thin, my skin felt raw, my mind felt scraped clean. Silas knelt beside me, breathing hard. "You did good," he said. I didn't answer. "You almost did." I dragged a shaking hand over my face. What was that?" Silas stared at the cave in the distance. "A story older than names," he said softly. "Older than these trees. Older than the people who learned to fear them. Some say they're guardians. Some say they're hunters. Some say they're echoes of something buried beneath the earth." "And you?" I asked. He hesitated. "I think they're reminders." "Of what?" "That reason cracks easy, and the dark always wants something back." A wind rose through the canopy, lifting needles into a slow, spiraling dance. For a moment, the forest felt calm again, like it was pretending to be what I'd always believed it was. But I could still feel the cave behind us, still feel the presence watching, still feel the breath that had shaped my name. "You're not done with it," Silas said. "I know. And it's not done with you." I closed my eyes as the wind brushed my skin, no longer cold, but still carrying something ancient about something patient, something that would wait for me as long as the forest stood, maybe longer. And somewhere deep underground, in the darkness where secrets live like roots, something breathed once more, slow, deliberate, expectant. I didn't answer, but I heard it, and I knew it would whisper again.